The sky over Virelia used to shimmer, not with stars, but with living light. From the surface of their ocean-covered world, you'd see ribbons of soft blue and violet glowing beneath the waves, rising and falling like breath. The people who lived there didn't build cities of steel or glass. Instead, they coaxed coral into spiraling towers that hummed with life, homes grown over generations fed by tides and memory. They spoke not just with words, but with patterns of light that danced across their skin, joy rippling gold, sorrow deepening to indigo, warning flashing sharp white. It wasn't magic. It was just how they were, how they'd always been. For centuries, they watched the stars, curious but cautious. Their ships rarely left the system. Why would they? Everything they needed, their history, their songs, their children's laughter, was right here, cradled by warm seas and gentle moons. But the galaxy didn't stay quiet forever. It started with whispers. Strange signals from the outer rim. Then came the broadcasts, clean, cold, and commanding. The Helion Conquered, a coalition of dozens of worlds, had declared a new policy. Unity through standardization. All member and neighboring systems were to adopt Conquered-approved language, governance, and cultural norms. Those who resisted would be reintegrated for the greater stability of the galactic community. The Virelians sent diplomats. They offered trade, knowledge of sustainable ocean farming, even shared their bioluminescent communication tech. But the Concord didn't want exchange. They wanted compliance. When the Virelian Council refused to dismantle their ancestral coral archives, sacred libraries grown over millennia, the Concord labeled them obstructionists, then unstable, then, finally, non-viable. The first strike wasn't with weapons, it was with silence. The Concord severed all communication relays, cut off trade routes, declared Virelia a quarantine zone, though no disease existed. Then came the ships, sleek, silver, and utterly silent as they descended. They didn't bomb the cities. They didn't need to. Instead, they deployed sonic dampeners that disrupted the coral's resonance, causing entire districts to crumble like dry sand. They released atmospheric filters that choked the bioluminescent plankton, the very source of the sea's glow. Within weeks, the light beneath the waves began to fade. Panic spread, but not chaos. The Virelians had survived storms, tidal shifts, even ancient wars. They knew how to endure. In hidden bays, elders packed what they could. Seed pods of moon kelp, data crystals etched with oral histories, vials of symbiotic microbes that helped their bodies process salt and light. A few old freighters, meant for deep-sea mineral runs, were retrofitted in secret, engines patched, life support jury-rigged. Navigation charts updated with one desperate destination, a pale blue dot mentioned in forgotten star logs, a world so far off it barely registered on galactic maps. Earth. One night, under a sky already dimmed by Conquered surveillance drones, a small group slipped away. Among them was a scientist who'd spent her life studying how coral and current shaped memory. She held her young daughter close, the child's skin flickering with nervous silver pulses. The girl didn't understand why they were leaving, only that the sea had gone quiet and the elders' songs had turned to whispers. The scientist carried a satchel filled not with weapons but with seeds, tiny, coiled things that looked like dried seaweed but held the blueprint of their entire food system. If they were to survive anywhere, they'd need to grow more than just food. They'd need to grow hope. The freighter shuddered as it broke orbit. Below, the last lights of Virelia winked out. Not from destruction, but from surrender. The Conquered hadn't destroyed the planet. They'd simply made it uninhabitable for those who called it home. The ship jumped to warp, engines groaning under the strain. Inside, the refugees huddled in dim cabins, listening to the hum of machinery that felt alien compared to the living pulse of their coral homes. The child asked, "Will the new place glow too?" Her mother didn't answer right away. She just held her tighter, watching the stars blur into streaks outside the viewport. They traveled for months, years by Earth's reckoning. Time stretched thin in the void. Supplies ran low. Two elders passed quietly in their sleep, their final light patterns fading like embers. The ship's systems flickered, patched again and again with spare parts and stubborn will. But they kept going, because turning back meant vanishing, not just dying but being erased. No records, no songs. No one left to remember that Virelia ever existed. Then one morning the sensors pinged. A planet blue swirled with white clouds, oceans visible even from orbit. It looked alive. Not like Virelia, no, but alive in its own way. Mountains, forests, rivers cutting through continents. The crew held their breath. Was this the place? The old star chart said yes. But charts could be wrong. And humans were unknown. They sent a distress signal, not in words, but in pulses of light and low-frequency sound, the universal language of need. They didn't know if anyone would understand. They didn't even know if humans could see their light. But they had no other choice. The ship was failing. Life support was down to 30%. They couldn't orbit forever. Below, on a chain of rocky islands in the northern Pacific, a radar station picked up something strange. Not a meteor, not a satellite. Something slow, irregular, and broadcasting a signal that made no sense. Until a young analyst, half asleep during a night shift, noticed the pattern repeated like a heartbeat. He flagged it. Hours later, a Coast Guard cutter changed course through freezing fog, searching for what might be a downed aircraft, or something else entirely. When the Virelian ship finally descended, it didn't land with grace. One engine failed. The hull scraped against volcanic rock, tearing open like paper. Smoke curled into the icy air. Inside, the survivors coughed, disoriented by Earth's thick atmosphere, so heavy, so dry. The child clung to her mother, eyes wide at the strange gray sky, the biting wind, the absence of the sea's familiar hum. Footsteps approached. Boots on stone, flashlights cutting through mist, human voices, sharp, wary, speaking a language that sounded like stones tumbling in a stream. The Virelians didn't move. They raised their hands, palms open, skin dim but pulsing faintly with fear. One of them held up a seed pod, offering it like a peace token. The humans hesitated. Guns were lowered but not holstered. Someone called for a translator, for a medic, for someone who knew what to do with beings who glowed in the dark and carried seaweed in their pockets. No one knew it yet, but in that cold, wet moment on a forgotten island, under a sky that didn't shimmer, the first real act of shelter had begun. Not because Earth owed them anything, but because someone chose to see not invaders, not monsters, but people who had lost everything, and still offered a seed. The first thing they noticed about Earth was how loud it was. Not the crashing waves or the wind. Those were familiar, almost comforting. It was the hum of machines, the distant roar of engines, the sharp crackle of radios, and the constant low buzz of electricity in the air. To the newcomers, it felt like the planet itself was talking all the time, never resting. And the air, so dry it made their skin itch and their eyes sting. They'd spent their whole lives breathing air thick with sea mist and salt, and now every breath felt thin, like trying to drink from an empty cup. They were taken to a medical tent first, set up quickly on the rocky shore. Bright lights, white coats, people moving fast with clipboards and scanners. The humans were careful but nervous. They kept their distance, spoke in hushed tones, and wore masks, not just for safety, but because they didn't know what to expect. One of the newcomers, a young one with wide eyes, reached out toward a medic's flashlight. Their skin flickered softly in response to the beam. Blue at first, then a gentle green. The medic froze, then slowly lowered the light. "It's reacting," someone whispered. Not aggressive, just curious. That moment changed everything. Word spread fast. Not just through official channels, but through the kind of quiet networks that exist in remote places. Fishing crews, local radio operators, park rangers who'd seen strange lights in the sky. Within hours, a call went out to a special team that had been quietly formed after a few other odd encounters in recent years. This team wasn't military. They were scientists, linguists, doctors, and cultural mediators, all trained to handle situations no one had believed would ever happen. Among them was a quiet man who'd spent years studying how humans communicated with dolphins, elephants, even trees. He'd always believed language wasn't just about words, it was about rhythm, gesture, shared space. When he heard about beings who spoke with light, he didn't laugh. He packed his bag and got on the next flight. By the time he arrived, the group had been moved to a secure facility, a former research station on the mainland, surrounded by pine forests and silence. It was cold inside, sterile, but at least the windows let in real sunlight. The newcomers were given rooms, simple beds, and water that had been specially treated to match the mineral balance of their home ocean. They didn't eat much at first. Earth food confused their bodies, but they drank the water gratefully, and one of them even smiled, a ripple of warm amber across their cheeks when they tasted it. The real breakthrough came slowly, over days. The scientist didn't rush. He sat with them, played soft sounds, ocean waves, whale songs, even rainfall. He watched how their skin responded. He mirrored their gestures. When one of them tapped their chest twice, he did the same. When they tilted their head toward the window at sunset, he followed their gaze. Little by little, trust grew. Not through speeches or demands, but through shared silence and small acts of care. Meanwhile, outside the facility, the world was reacting. A blurry photo had leaked, taken by a technician's phone, showing one of the newcomers standing by a window, their skin glowing faintly in the twilight. It spread online like wildfire. Some called it a hoax. Others screamed invasion. A few fringe groups showed up at the gates with signs shouting about national security. But something unexpected happened too. Teachers shared the image in classrooms. Artists painted murals of glowing figures under Earth skies. A grandmother in Alaska wrote a letter saying, "If they've lost their home, we should offer ours." The story wasn't just fear. It was also wonder. Back inside, progress continued. The scientist brought in a simple tablet. He drew shapes, circles, lines, spirals. One of the newcomers touched the screen and their fingertip left a soft trail of light that lingered for a few seconds. They pointed to the spiral, then to their own chest. "Home," the scientist guessed aloud. The being nodded, and their skin bloomed with a pattern that looked like swirling water. He recorded it. Later, he played it back. They lit up, literally, with joy. It was the first time they'd heard their own memory echoed back to them. The young one, the child, was the quickest to adapt. Within weeks, they were mimicking English sounds, pointing at objects, repeating words like water, light, sky. They loved music. When someone played a simple flute one evening, the child swayed, their skin pulsing in time with the notes. It wasn't just imitation. It was connection. Still, it wasn't easy. Earth's gravity weighed heavier than they expected. Their bones ached. The dry air made their skin crack. And the silence of the night, no choral hum, no ocean chorus, left them feeling untethered, like they were floating in empty space. Some nights they gathered in a shared room, holding hands, humming low tones that vibrated through the floor. It was their way of remembering, of saying, "We're still here." After a month of careful talks, tests, and quiet understanding, a decision was made at the highest levels. These weren't threats. They were survivors. And Earth, for all its noise and chaos, had a long history of offering shelter to those with nowhere else to go. An agreement was signed, not loudly, not with fanfare, but with quiet dignity. The group would be granted temporary asylum. They'd be moved to a larger, more permanent site where they could begin to rebuild. Not just survive. The new place was in the Pacific Northwest, cool, rainy, surrounded by forests and rivers that ran clean and cold. It had once been a government research campus, abandoned after budget cuts. Now it would become something new, a home for people who'd crossed light years to find safety. Trucks arrived with supplies, soil, water filters, grow lights, books, musical instruments, even a small greenhouse. The humans didn't just give shelter. They asked, "What do you need to feel like yourselves again?" When the newcomers stepped onto the wet grass of their new home for the first time, rain fell softly around them. One of them knelt, pressed their palm to the earth, and closed their eyes. Their skin glowed, not bright but steady like a heartbeat. The child ran ahead, laughing at the feel of mud between their toes, something they'd never experienced before. For the first time since leaving their world, they weren't just guests. They were beginning to belong. And the humans who helped them, they didn't feel like heroes. They just felt like neighbors. Because in the end, helping someone find shelter isn't about grand gestures. It's about seeing another person's pain and choosing to make space for their light, even if it's different from your own. Life in the new place was strange, like living inside a dream that hadn't quite decided if it was safe or not. The buildings were solid, the food was regular, and no one shouted at them anymore. But it still didn't feel like home. Not really. The air was too dry, the ground too still, and the nights too quiet. Back on their world, even in sleep, you could feel the ocean breathing beneath you. Gentle, constant, alive. Here everything felt paused, like the world was holding its breath. The adults spent most days working with scientists and botanists, trying to grow the few precious seeds they'd brought with them. These weren't ordinary plants. They were moon kelp, thin, coiled strands that needed salt water, specific light cycles, and a kind of tidal rhythm to thrive. Without them, their bodies slowly weakened. Their skin lost its glow. Their thoughts grew heavy. One of the elders said it best. "We don't just eat this plant. It remembers who we are." But Earth's soil didn't understand moon kelp. The first batch withered within days. The second turned brown and brittle. Frustration settled in like fog. They'd escaped destruction only to face a slower kind of fading, starving not for food but for meaning. Meanwhile, the child was changing faster than anyone expected. School had started. Not a regular classroom, but a small learning space set up just for them, with teachers who spoke slowly, used pictures, and played music to help with words. At first, they barely spoke. But kids are quick. Within months, they were answering questions, laughing at jokes, even correcting adults on pronunciation. They loved stories, especially ones about animals who talked, or stars that made wishes come true. They'd come home humming Earth songs, their skin flickering with soft pinks and yellows, colors no one in their group had ever seen before. But not everything was easy. Some of the local kids were curious. Others were cruel. One afternoon, after a school trip to the town library, a group of older children followed them home, shouting things like glowworm and alien freak. The child didn't cry. They just walked faster, head down, their light dimming to a dull gray. That night, they refused to go back. The adults were torn. They wanted their young one to learn, to connect, to build a future here. But how could they ask a child to walk into a world that still saw them as something strange, something less than human? Outside the campus, things were getting louder too. That blurry photo from the coast had turned into videos, interviews, and news segments. Most were kind, but not all. Online, angry voices grew louder. "Why are we spending money on them?" One post read, "They don't even look like us." Another claimed they were spies or dangerous or carrying diseases. A small group even organized a protest at the edge of the property, holding signs that said "Earth first" and "Send them back." They never came close, security kept them far away. But the tension seeped in like cold air through a cracked window. One evening, during a community dinner, a human neighbor who'd been helping with the greenhouse asked gently, "Do you ever feel like you're just tolerated? Not truly welcome?" One of the newcomers looked down at their hands, then slowly raised their eyes. Their skin pulsed a deep blue, sadness, but also honesty. "We are grateful," they said carefully in halting English. "But shelter is not the same as belonging." That sentence stuck with everyone who heard it. Still, small moments of connection kept hope alive. A local farmer brought in rainwater collected from his roof, clean, soft, perfect for testing new kelp batches. A retired teacher started teaching them folk songs, and they'd respond by humming harmonies that made the room feel warmer. One rainy afternoon, a group of teenagers from the nearby town showed up with instruments, not to protest but to play. They'd heard the newcomers loved music, so they brought guitars, a drum, even a harmonica. No words were needed, just sound shared under a leaky awning while the rain fell around them. And then, something unexpected happened in the greenhouse. After weeks of trial and error, mixing seawater with local minerals, adjusting light to mimic Varelian tides, even playing low-frequency ocean recordings, the first moon kelp seed finally sprouted. Not just a green shoot, but a healthy, curling tendril that shimmered faintly under the grow lights. When the scientists saw it, they didn't cheer. They just stood very still, tears in their eyes. The adult who'd been tending it placed a hand over their heart. Their skin lit up in slow golden waves, the color of gratitude, of home returning. That tiny plant changed everything. It proved they could grow more than just food. They could grow a future. But the real turning point came from the child. One day, during a school video call with another class across the country, a student asked, "Do you miss your planet?" The child thought for a long moment. Then in clear, quiet English, they said, "I miss the light in the water. But Earth has its own light. In trees, in people's eyes. In rain." The teacher recorded it. Not for fame, just because it was beautiful. But someone shared it online. And then someone else. And soon, that short clip was everywhere. On news sites and classrooms, even played at a city council meeting debating refugee support. People weren't just seeing aliens anymore. They were seeing a child who missed home but was trying to love a new one. Support started pouring in, not from governments but from regular people. Donations for the greenhouse. Letters from kids saying, "You're not alone." A group of indigenous elders reached out, offering seeds from their own sacred plants, saying, "We know what it's like to lose land. Let's grow something together." Slowly, the feeling inside the campus began to shift. It wasn't just a place of waiting anymore. It was becoming a place of doing, of sharing, of healing. But the question still lingered in quiet moments. Was this enough? Could they ever truly belong here? Or would they always be guests in someone else's world? No one had the answer yet. But for the first time, they dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, belonging wasn't about where you came from. Maybe it was about who chose to stand beside you when you had nowhere else to go. The day the kelp finally grew strong enough to eat, something shifted, not just in the greenhouse, but in the whole community. It wasn't just a plant. It was proof that life could take root even in foreign soil. The adults prepared a small meal the old way, steamed kelp with mineral broth, served in hand-carved bowls made from local wood. As they ate, their skin began to glow again, not brightly but steadily, like embers waking up. For the first time in years, they felt like themselves. Word of the harvest spread fast, not through headlines, but through the quiet network of people who'd been watching, waiting, hoping. A group of local farmers came by the next week, not with questions, but with an offer. "We've got land that's too dry for wheat," one said, "but maybe your plants could help, and maybe your ways could teach us something about working with the earth, not against it." That simple offer opened a door no one expected. Soon, the campus wasn't just a shelter, it became a place of exchange. Scientists studied how the kelp purified water. Gardeners learned how its roots held soil together, even in heavy rain. A few curious students from the nearby college started volunteering, not to observe but to work side by side, hands in the dirt, sharing tools and stories. One young woman brought her grandmother's old seed-saving journal. In return, one of the newcomers showed her how to read the health of a plant not just by its leaves but by the faint light it gave off under certain conditions. "It's like listening," they said. "Plants speak if you know how to hear." But the real surprise came from an unexpected corner. A delegation of indigenous elders from a nearby nation reached out. They'd been following the story, not as science fiction but as something deeply familiar. "We were pushed from our lands too," one elder said during their first meeting. "Our songs were silenced, our children taken, our ways called backward. But we held on. And now we see you doing the same." They didn't offer pity. They offered partnership. They shared native seeds that thrived in dry climates. In return, they asked to learn about the kelp's resilience. Together, they planted a new garden, not Varelian, not Earth native, but something new. A blend. A promise. Then came the speech. The child, now more confident, had been invited to speak at a youth gathering organized by a global peace group. No one expected much, just a few words, maybe a song. But when they stepped up to the mic, they didn't recite a script. They spoke from the heart. "We didn't come here to take anything," they said, voice clear and calm. "We came because we had nothing left. But Earth didn't turn us away. You gave us water. You gave us space. You even tried to understand our light." They paused, looking out at the crowd. "Now we want to give back. Not because we owe you, but because this is how we say thank you. We grow food that helps your soil. We share songs that help your hearts. And we hope that one day no one has to run so far to find kindness." The room fell silent. Then someone started clapping. Then everyone. The video went viral, not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. People saw not an alien, but a kid who missed home but chose to build something new. Schools started showing it. Community centers played it at meetings. Even a few lawmakers quoted it in speeches about compassion over fear. Support poured in from places no one imagined. A group of retired teachers raised money to expand the greenhouse. A tech company donated solar panels so the lights could run longer. A children's book author wrote a story inspired by the kelp garden, with illustrations showing glowing hands planting seeds under Earth's moon. All the profits went to the community, but the most powerful change happened quietly in everyday moments. At the local market, vendors started setting aside a table for campus-grown produce, kelp-based snacks, herbal teas, even a kind of salt made from filtered seawater they'd learned to replicate. People bought them not out of charity, but because they tasted good, because they were curious, because they wanted to be part of something hopeful. Kids from town began visiting after school, not to stare but to help. They'd water plants, sketch the glowing patterns on the newcomer's skin with permission, or just sit and talk about music, games, or what scared them at night. Friendships formed. Not human and alien, just friends. One rainy afternoon, a group of teenagers showed up with instruments again. This time they didn't just play. They asked, "Can you teach us your songs?" So the elders sang, low, resonant hums that vibrated in your chest. The teens tried to mimic them, laughing when they got it wrong. And slowly a new kind of music was born. Part earth, part Virelia, all heart. Even the protests faded. Not because anyone shouted them down, but because the story changed. People stopped seeing strangers and started seeing neighbors. When someone tried to post angry comments online, others replied with photos of the shared garden, videos of kids playing together, recipes using kelp flour. The narrative shifted from fear to curiosity, from them to us. And through it all, the campus kept growing, not just in size, but in spirit. New buildings were built with help from local carpenters. The walls were made of wood and woven reeds, shaped to echo the curves of coral towers. Windows were placed to catch the morning, sun just right for the plants and for the people who still needed light to feel whole. The scientist who'd first sat with them in silence now worked alongside them as equals. "I came to study you," they admitted one day. "But you taught me how to listen." No one claimed everything was perfect. There were still hard days, nights when the silence felt too heavy, moments when a careless word stung, times when the weight of all they'd lost pressed down like a storm cloud. But now they didn't carry it alone, because Earth hadn't just given them shelter, it had given them a chance to give back. And in doing so, they'd found something they thought they'd lost forever, a place where they could be more than survivors. They could be teachers, gardeners, friends, neighbors, and that more than anything felt like home. 5 years had passed since the broken ship first limped into Earth's sky, and the place that once felt like a waiting room had become something far more alive. The old research campus was barely recognizable now. Where there had been empty fields and cracked pavement, there were gardens, some growing earth vegetables, others curling with luminous kelp, and many with both, planted side by side like old friends. The buildings had changed too. Wooden beams curved like ocean waves, walls woven with reeds and dried vines, windows angled to catch the morning light just right, not just for plants, but for the people who still needed that soft glow to feel steady inside. Life here wasn't perfect, but it was real. Kids, both from the original group and from the nearby town, ran barefoot through the grass, laughing in a mix of English and the soft musical tones of the newcomers' native speech. They didn't think about who was from here and who wasn't. To them, this was just home. They climbed trees together, shared lunches under the big oak near the greenhouse, and sometimes stayed up late telling ghost stories that blended Earth legends with tales of glowing sea spirits from a world none of them had ever seen. The adults had found their rhythm too. One of the original scientists now co-taught a class at the local college on ecological memory, how land, plants, and people hold stories in their very cells. Their research, published with human colleagues, was being used in drought-prone regions around the world. Farmers in Africa and Australia were testing kelp-based soil treatments that held moisture longer, thanks to a partnership that started with a single handshake and a shared worry about a changing planet. The child, the one who'd once clung to their parent on that cold Alaskan shore, was now in college. Studying environmental law, they'd started a small nonprofit that helped displaced communities, human and otherwise, navigate asylum systems and rebuild with dignity. It wasn't flashy. No big offices or fancy titles. Just a team of passionate people working quietly, connecting dots between cultures, laws, and hearts. They often said, shelter is the first step. Belonging is the real work. And belonging had taken root here, deep and quiet. Every Sunday, the community gathered for what they called shared light. It wasn't a ceremony, not exactly. More like a habit. People brought food, soups made with kelp broth, bread baked with native grains, fruit pies from the orchard down the road. They sat in a circle under the open sky, no stage, no speakers. Sometimes someone played music. Sometimes an elder told a story. Often no one spoke at all. They just sat together, watching the sunset paint the clouds gold and pink, while the newcomer's skin responded softly to the fading light, gentle pulses of blue, violet, amber. It was during one of these evenings that a visitor from the United Nations asked, Do you ever think about going back? The question hung in the air for a moment. Then one of the elders smiled, a slow, warm ripple across their face. Back is a memory, they said. Home is where you're allowed to grow. Earth let us grow, so this is home. That didn't mean they'd forgotten Virelia. Far from it. In a quiet corner of the campus stood the Memory Grove, a small grove of trees planted in the shape of their old coral towers. At its center was a pool filled with filtered seawater, where the first strands of moon kelp still grew, tended like sacred flame. On certain nights, the community would gather there, hum the old songs, and watch their skin light up in patterns passed down for generations. It wasn't nostalgia. It was continuity, a way of saying we are still us, even here. Outside the campus, the world kept turning. The Hellion Concord still existed, still expanding, still enforcing its rigid order across the stars. But Earth had quietly drawn a line, not with weapons or threats, but with open doors. Other small groups fleeing similar fates from distant corners of the galaxy had begun to arrive. Not many, just enough to remind everyone that kindness, once practiced, becomes a habit. And this place, once called Sanctuary Haven in official documents, was now just the Grove to those who lived there. No labels, no categories, just a patch of earth where different kinds of life learned to breathe together. One evening, as autumn painted the leaves red and gold, the whole community prepared for the Virelian New Year, a night that, on their old world, marked the return of the twin moons and the rebirth of the coral bloom. Here there were no twin moons, but there was a full earth moon, round and bright, casting silver light over the fields. As darkness fell, people gathered in the central courtyard. Someone lit a fire, not for warmth but for symbol. Others brought drums, flutes, stringed instruments made from local wood and Virelian fibers. The elders began to sing, low and resonant, voices weaving together like roots in soil. And then slowly their skin began to glow, not in fear or warning, but in celebration. Soft blues, deep purples, warm golds rippled across arms, faces, hands held together in a circle. Then something beautiful happened. The human neighbors, farmers, teachers, kids, elders didn't just watch. They joined in, not by trying to glow, but by adding their own light. Someone struck a drum beat that matched the elders' rhythm. A teenager played a flute melody that echoed the choral songs. An old woman began to hum a lullaby her grandmother had sung to her, and others picked it up, blending it into the Virelian harmony. No one had planned it. It just happened, like rain finding its way to the sea. In that moment, under a sky full of stars neither group had been born under, exile ended. Not because they'd returned to where they came from, but because they'd built something new together, something that honored both where they'd been and where they now stood. And as the fire crackled and the music rose into the cool night air, you couldn't tell who was who anymore. Just people, just light, just home.